So again, my name is Adele Phillips. I'm with the Department of Natural Resources. I'm the Flood Mitigation Planner. Lexy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I am Lexy Hindt. I'm the Deputy State Hazard Mitigation Officer at NEMA. I'm glad to be here presenting with Adele today.
Thank you. Okay, so flooding is a known hazard. Our floodplains are inherently hazardous places. We've got frequent reminders in the last couple of decades, especially in 2019, that these mapped areas really do represent a flood risk. Flooding is actually the most frequently reported hazard in Nebraska, followed by drought. And we know this based on those local hazard mitigation plans. In the floodplain area, in the life of a 30-year mortgage, a home that's in that special flood hazard area has a 26% chance of experiencing a flood. That's a better than 1 in 4 chance. So the odds aren't as slim as a lot of homeowners actually think. On top of that, we know that climate models show that Nebraska is getting wetter across the state. Our springs in particular are getting wetter, while our summers are getting drier. So we've got increasing flood and drought risk concurrently. Our climate research is also showing that our storm events are going to increase in frequency. That means we'll see more storms, and that they will increase in scale and intensity, meaning for each storm, we're going to have more rainfall at greater volume when it's coming down. And also they're going to decrease in predictability. That means our forecasting mechanisms aren't going to be able to be as precise or give you as advanced notice as we would like. According to the National Climate Assessment from 1958 to 2012, the state of Nebraska, the amount of precipitation we received during the heaviest storm events has increased 16%. So that's just up until 2012. And that percentage of the amount of precipitation we receive is going to continue to increase. So flooding is only going to become more prevalent. And that's statistics from our Changing Climate National Climate Assessment, by the way. The reason we want to reduce our flood risk is because we get benefits. When you reduce your flood risk through mitigation, you will enjoy certain benefits, such as decreasing the premiums you and your neighbors pay on flood insurance. There's the obvious health and safety benefit that you get. It maintains your quality of life. You know, when you're not subject to nuisance flooding, you can spend your energy on things which you'd rather be doing instead. It also preserves natural floodplain functions. And when we preserve natural floodplain functions overall, and all these things above, overall, we improve our community's resilience. Now, resiliency is a term you've probably heard a lot. What it means in our context is that it's a community's ability to recover more quickly from a disaster or other setback. And when a community works towards resilience, that means taking actions now to help keep the community safe in the future. So that's mitigation. There are many ways to mitigate. I've got some general categories here into which mitigation measures may be classed. To give you an overview of each of these, prevention is a category that includes planning and zoning actions. Those of you who are floodplain administrators and are implementing your floodplain management ordinance, you are actively engaging in a prevention mitigation measure. If you've got stormwater management plans or open space protections in your zoning code, those are prevention mitigation measures. Natural resource protection means wetland protection, grass waterways, either maintaining grass waterways or implementing them. It means erosion and sediment control systems, such as if you've got a construction project with a lot of grading, putting those straw wattles down and ensuring that no soils run off from the construction site, that's a sediment control system that ensures or reduces risk of flooding. Also, stormwater best management practices. Maybe you've got some filtration systems that you require developers to build or design into their plans, say when they're paving a new parking lot, ensuring that it's draining into that filtration system and adequately slowing and processing the water before it enters into your stormwater system, or keep it out of the stormwater system as a whole. Public information is another category. Non-infrastructural. This means having your flood hazard boundary maps available in your public office, available for the public to view at all times, having them available on your community's website. It can also mean such things as real estate disclosures, ensuring that prospective buyers know that they are buying property that is in a location with a known risk. And public information can include a whole host of other outreach projects. Maybe your local utilities district puts out a little reminder about flood risk and the need for permitting annually. There's a variety of ways to spread the word. Property protection generally covers acquisition of properties, purchasing land or structures to preserve it as open space and allow that floodplain to flood. Elevation can mean raising the height of a structure so that while it's in a floodplain, at least it's above flood risk. Floodproofing, wet or dry approaches, and also such devices as sewer backflow prevention. Often in flood events, a community's sewer system can be overwhelmed and things can go up the pipes when we really only want them to go down. Nobody wants sewage in their basement. So small interventions can be made to protect property too. Emergency services, advanced warning systems, giving people a heads up that a flood could occur or that we've got a storm coming that presents flood risk. Our flood response, our police and fire, volunteer fire departments, they're being able to assist after a flood has occurred, and also critical facilities, making sure that they are protected, making sure that they are located outside of the floodplain. Critical facilities includes a whole host of things, such as health clinics, your police department, your fire department, just those parties and involved in disaster response, as well as the things necessary for the community to weather the disaster and the recovery from disaster. And then lastly, there's structural projects. And sometimes these are the first things that come to people's minds when they think flood mitigation. Folks often think of reservoirs or detention basins and channel modifications, such as dredging or altering the course of a waterway. And it can also include culvert and bridge enlarging. These are often costly and to implement and also have maintenance costs long term. Next slide. When we talk about mitigation measures, we're trying to encourage you to take a holistic, whole watershed approach. This diagram, and sorry for the low image quality, but it's called the Strahler stream order. I'm using it here for illustrative purposes. In this diagram, the 1s are small tributaries and waterways. The 3s and 4s are rivers. When you think about mitigation measures, try to take a watershed perspective. In this diagram, the 1s can be considered your intermittent streams or seasonal drainages in our fields. They can also be roadside ditches. Our roads actually behave like tributaries to our waterways. They are concentrating and directing rainwater into our watershed. So these are all networked elements, and everything that happens in the upper watershed, the 1s and 2s, have impacts in the lower watershed, the 3s and 4s. When we think about mitigation and think about our watershed, the best mitigation measures are going to be ones that capture and sequester rain where it lands. So, because overall, that reduces the load on this system, and it reduces the load on any of those mitigation measures that you've implemented, particularly the infrastructure. I'm going to go into more detail about those mitigation measure categories that I described with some images here. So nature-based solutions, and that's a term you'll want to know. Nature-based solutions are some of the most cost-effective ways to mitigate. They're low maintenance. They use the natural functions of our environment for our benefit. According to the Natural Resources Conservation Service, that's the NRCS, for those of you involved in agriculture, I'm sure you've heard of them, approximately 25% of the Missouri River Basin, which is the entire state contributes to the Missouri River Basin, has been converted from grassland to croplands, and much of that is annually tilled. When we till annually, we reduce soil health, and soil health is a product of the soil structure, the amount of organic material that's in the soil, and when we have that annual tillage, the soil health is reduced, and we increase runoff, which increases flood risk and creates loads on our flood control systems. Okay. So the forces exerted on the soil by tillage equipment can create a hard pan, which annual roots can't penetrate, and then the roots can't penetrate, water can't penetrate. So in certain tillage systems, we're not able to capture the water where it falls. So one of the great mitigation measures that can be considered in any watershed is to have grass waterways in our fields. This example is a before and after picture. Before is on the left, after is on the right. So they were able to control the sediment the soil that you can see clearly is sheeting off of this field by implementing this grass waterway. It's really important to note here that these mitigation measures that improve soil health for flood resiliency also improve drought resiliency. And while flooding is, the #1 hazard cited across the state, drought's #2. So here you have co-benefits that can be accomplished from implementing the same mitigation measure. A couple other examples of nature-based solutions. This is a sort of neighborhood scale approach. Here we've got, on the left, we've got a bioswale in a road median. So water that's flowing off of this road is going into this bioswale, getting slowed down, getting filtered, and getting sequestered, so that it's creating less of a load on this jurisdiction's stormwater management. On the right, we've got a rainwater garden. We've got runoff from a residence is going down the downspout, and through this rain garden that they've installed. Again, the idea is that this small local measure is reducing the load on the system. And then FEMA has a great guide. It's called NatureBased Solutions. That's free, available online. And Michelle is going to put a link to this document in the chat. You can use this to figure out some natural interventions for your jurisdiction that would be appropriate. And there's going to be several links, by the way, that are shared during this presentation. And you should have received all of them in the email from Michelle this morning. So if you don't catch them from the chat, hopefully they're in your inbox as well. We've got another, in terms of future land use planning mitigation, we've got, oops, here we go. We've got this resource from the Department of Natural Resources. We mentioned the local hazard mitigation plans earlier, but your other long-range plans can include comprehensive land use plans, general plans. So these are great instruments for your jurisdiction to have a conversation about your goals and to identify areas that you want to protect and mechanisms, policy mechanisms that you want to use to protect those areas or implement those goals. When you've got mitigation goals captured in a plan, you can cite those mitigation goals in your grant applications. These mitigation goals being captured in these long-range planning instruments is demonstration of political will that these are priorities for your jurisdiction. When you're demonstrating that it's of your jurisdiction's political will, that's got great appeal to the funder. Lexy is going to share more detail about the local hazard mitigation plans that the NRDs develop or update every 5 years. So I won't go into more detail on this. And critical facilities. As I said earlier, a whole host of things can be critical facilities. These are things that need to remain operational in your community after a disaster. Hospitals, nursing homes, fire departments, police departments, your power supply, whatever it is, your drinking water supply, and your wastewater treatment. It's critical that these remain functioning for your community. Certain roadways can also be considered critical facilities. We saw in 2019 that a lot of communities essentially became islands because the arteries that allowed access in and out of those communities were damaged. Bridges, road sections were washed out, and people couldn't get in or get out. So it made it extremely difficult for aid to reach those communities. There's a term coming out in FEMA and that FEMA started to use as part of the grant cycle, and that's lifelines. So you can think of critical facilities as lifelines as well. Next, I mentioned the structural mitigation measures or property protection mitigation measures. Here we've got a couple of examples of home elevation. Again, the home is still technically in the floodplain, but it's raised up out of flood risk. Clearly you see this home is up on blocks, the one on the left. The one on the right, the lower or ground floor area is storage, and the living quarters are up on the second floor. Now, in past with insurance, if you raised your home, your insurance rates would go down. Now we've got new insurance rating metrics that are a little bit different. They're going to be coming into effect October 1st. So it's not necessarily a given how insurance rates will relate to home elevation. It's still definitely a factor, but it's not quite the one-to-one relationship that it was before. With regard, again, to property protection, buyouts are an option for a community. here, these are two images from the same street in Beatrice, Nebraska. The home on the left was removed along with several others to create the open space that you see on the right. So they've removed the development from the street so to make space for floodwaters. It's still an accessible space. It's still a place in which people can recreate, but now it performs the duty of being able to accommodate those floodwaters, and nobody's lives or property are at risk any longer from these recurring floods. So when we remove structures and permeable surfaces from floodplains, we help restore these natural floodplain functions that I mentioned before. And these floodplain functions are providing space for wildlife habitat, the storage and slowing down of floodwaters, protecting water quality, and recharging groundwater. These are all things that help reduce the severity of flooding. And we've got a great story map online. If you're interested in learning more about the benefits of Beatrice's property acquisition program and the history of its initiation, click on the link that Michelle just provided in the chat and delve into that. I mean, it's a really robust program that's been long-standing in Nebraska. One detail, I guess, or one benefit from their efforts, and I don't know if this is still true, but in 2015, they had some flooding, and at that time, that 2015 flood was the third largest flood in the community's history. And the community was able to estimate that in that one flood event in 2015, they were able to prevent nearly $13 million in flood damage because they removed these structures from the floodplain. And it wasn't just that by removing structures from floodplains, they avoided damage to those structures. They also lessened or reduced the level of damage that other areas encountered as benefit of those structures being removed. So it's not just removing impacts to specific places, it's removing impacts to the whole community. There were broad-based benefits. Now, I've got a lot of links that are going to show up in the chat here now. This is a list of various funds that your jurisdiction can consider when looking for financial support for implementing mitigation measures. The first few are federal funding sources through FEMA. The first two are administered through NEMA, which Lexy is going to talk about, the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program and the BRIC program. And we've also got the Flood Mitigation Assistance Grants, and that's administered by the Department of Natural Resources. The three of these are available through FEMA. And Lexi's going to share more about FMA as well. One thing that's important to know, many of you know about this training because you are a floodplain administrator with our National Flood Insurance Program participating communities. A NFIP community needs to be in good standing in order to access FEMA funds. So make sure you are, on a day-to-day basis, following through with the agreement that you made with FEMA to administrate your flood insurance program. Following down to CDBG, the HUD Community Development Block Grants. So these are through the Department of Housing and Urban Development. You can pursue CDBG grants to do a watershed scale approach to Flood mitigation. There's a great project going on in the West Nishnabotna River watershed in southwest Iowa, funded by CDBG funds, where different property owners are able to put in bank stabilization and several other measures as a whole watershed scale approach to preventing flood impacts. There is the Land and Water Conservation Fund from the National Park Service. This is administered or can be pursued with support and assistance from the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission. It's a fund that supports the creation of parks and other outdoor recreational facilities. So if you're trying to create some open space and you want to have the added or additional use of recreation for your community, consider looking into the Land and Water Conservation Fund. There's also USD NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service. They have a whole host of programs and resources available. And the best person to contact or talk to get started to learn about these resources is your district conservationist. There are several NRCS offices throughout the state. Of note for flood mitigation is the EQIP program. That is the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. I'm sure any farmers in the room, you've heard about this program. But EQIP can help private landowners maintain stream bank stability. And there's also the Watershed and Flood Prevention Operations Program, or WFPO. And this helps local governments restore watersheds up to 250,000 acres. So again, if you want to learn more about these programs, reach out to that NRCS District Conservationist. There's also within the USDA, the Rural Development Program. USDA Rural Development has two programs that can help with mitigation. There's one called Community Facilities and also the Water and Environment Program. So check out your USDA Rural Development Office if you want to learn more about those projects. And lastly, I've got not quite lastly, but the next one's National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, or NFWF, and the Nebraska Environmental Trust and Nebraska Community Foundation. These are foundations. These are not government grants. You can consider reaching out to these foundations, find out what their priorities are currently, and start a conversation to see how their interests align with your mitigation goals. They've got an obligation to provide funds or to disperse funds, and you've got a need. So you can help one another out by seeing where your goals align and where those overlaps are in project interest. And lastly, the last link is this compendium of active transportation related funding info. So there's transportation funds that can help you accomplish your mitigation project. When, maybe you've got a larger open space plan, but part of that is a rails to trails component. So maybe you can pursue some transportation grant money to at least get the rails to trails part off the ground. It'll be a component of that larger project. When you're thinking about grants, we've got some advice we'd like to share, and that is partnerships are key. You need to demonstrate that you and several stakeholders are working together to make a compelling grant application. Start small. You will have a big picture vision, but identify within that big picture vision the actionable small components where you can begin. As you successfully implement those smaller components, you will be able to garner more and more funding because you've demonstrated at this one step successful and responsible implementation of funding. Look for, as I mentioned earlier, look for funds that can support key components of your project. Even if the entirety of the project is not eligible for a certain fund, maybe select elements of that project can be funded by different funding sources. And tell the story, discover what makes your project compelling. You've got to tell the story of your community, tell the story of your vision, and spend plenty of time researching a grant. As I mentioned with those foundations, they've got interests and an obligation to disperse funds, but find out what those interests are, and tailor your narrative or your discussion so that it's obvious that funding your initiative is going to help them meet their objective.
Good afternoon, everyone. Adele talked a lot about mitigation actions and some mitigation funding that's available to you, but I'm going to really focus on what NEMA does, and specifically what our hazard mitigation unit does, as well as the FEMA programs that are available. And FEMA has done numerous studies on this, and they've noted that $1 invested in disaster mitigation ends up saving $6 during the community's next disaster that they encounter. So mitigation really does save, it saves a lot. We can move on to the next slide. So just a quick agenda. We're gonna go through what is NEMA doing right now, the HM unit, what programs does NEMA run, as well as resources and how to get mitigation funding. So currently the NEMA hazard mitigation team has 5 open disaster related grants, 3 pre-disaster grants, and then we are currently moving through BRIC. The first round of BRIC funding, we had a handful of projects selected for further review, so we're going through that, and then we're getting prepared for BRIC next year. So with 4420, which was the 2019 flooding event, this was the highest dollar amount NEMA has ever received in hazard mitigation grant programs. So we're working through those grant applications right now, and those grant applications are across the state, and a lot of them are going to work on that flood reduction and flood mitigation as well. But a few of them don't, but we're looking at about $45 million total share, which would result in about $33 million federal share that we're going to put into the communities to make them more resilient and mitigate against the flooding hazard as well as other hazards. So part of what we do here at NEMA is we have hazard mitigation plans. There are 21 hazard mitigation plans throughout the state. Most of them are housed within the NRD because they are that watershed base that Adele talked about, but a handful of them are not. Some of them are just grouped in by counties that have come together, and that's how they wanted to work. But they do take the watershed approach when looking at mitigation actions. Participation in a mitigation plan as well as adoption is the #1 criteria for participating or receiving any HMA funding. So if you don't participate in your mitigation plan and your community has not adopted the mitigation plan, then unfortunately you are ineligible for hazard mitigation funding through FEMA. But the plans that we have go through a 5-year planning cycle. So there is always the opportunity to join the plan for the next go around as well. And within these plans, they identify the types of hazards that the communities face, as well as mitigation actions to address those hazards. So FEMA has 3 programs that fall under hazard mitigation assistance. We have the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, which becomes available after every federally declared disaster. And it's open to the entire state, just not the impacted areas. And it's managed by the NEMA Hazard Mitigation Unit. And we open, once we know that we're getting a federal disaster and hazard mitigation funds have been approved, we open up an NOI period where we take these NOIs from the communities throughout the state, and then we prioritize them by which lines up with our priorities based on the type of disaster. And we work with them to do the application phase, and our main goal is to get them funding at the end of that phase. We also have the Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities grant, which is known as BRIC. It's a yearly 6% set aside from all federally declared disasters in the previous year. It is open to all 50 states and territories. There are 2 categories. We all get a state set aside, and then there's a nationwide competitive one as well. This grant is also managed by the Hazard Mitigation Unit. We just went through BRIC year and it went all right. So we're definitely looking forward to year 2, where the White House has announced that there's going to be $1 billion available to that. We don't know what that's going to look like yet, how much the states are going to get, or if anything is going to be earmarked for specific types of mitigation actions. But we are preparing for that, and FEMA is going to do a series of webinars about BRIC as well. So once we have more of a handle on that, we'll definitely be sharing that with the communities. And then the final HMA funding assistance is the flood mitigation assistance. This is a yearly appropriation from Congress that has a national flood insurance requirement to it. And that one is managed by Adele at DNR.
A note on flood mitigation assistance grants, a special aspect of it is that you have to demonstrate that flood insurance policy holders will benefit from it. So that's a little bit of a nuanced aspect of that one versus the other 2.
Like I said, just a little bit of an update on BRIC and FMA. On July 1st, FEMA announced all the applications that were selected for further review for BRIC and FMA. And Michelle has dropped that link in the chat as well. Like I said, we got a couple projects through BRIC, but we're hopeful for next year. Like I said, next year we're expected to have $1 billion. And FEMA will likely release the notice of funding opportunity in August of 2021. So that's coming soon. And we expect the application window for that to open in September and close in January of 22. We always have a list of notice of interest that have remained on file for a significant amount of time. So we're currently combing through those, but we are still accepting NOIs, and we always accept notice of interest, and I'll talk a little bit more about those and what we look for in those. But NEMA and DNR are going to work together this year to review and submit BRIC and FMA applications, and hopefully we can bring a lot more funding back into the state for this next year. So I talked a lot about all the funding that is available. So I'm sure you're all asking, well, how do I apply, or what's the process? So we always issue a notice of funding opportunity specifically for BRIC. This one will come out in the fall of 2021. But when we have HMGP as well, we look at what happened in the state, what type of federally declared disaster, and the state establishes some priorities, but priorities that also align with FEMA and what is eligible in the hazard mitigation the hazard mitigation guidance. If you have a mitigation project that you're interested in, I highly recommend going to NEMA's website, to the link there, to fill out a notice of interest. In this document, we'll just ask for contact information for the project, what kind of project you're looking to do, whether that is like acquisition or bank stabilization or conducting a safe room. And then we'll ask for a general cost estimate. We'll want to know if this is a mitigation action identified in your plan, where it's located, and then you'll have to provide a brief scope. And then you'll also compare it to, or rank it against the criteria that's been put forth in the notice of interest. So does it include nature-based solutions? Does it align with the priorities that have been set forth? What lifelines does it impact? And things like that. It's kind of a lengthy document, but it just provides us with the best information so that we can take that to the task force, which is built up of a bunch of different state agencies, and they all review the NOIs, comment on them, ask for more information. Then ultimately they'll prioritize the projects that we want to see move forward into the application phase. And then once prioritized, we'll move into the application phase. But if you're interested in filling out a notice of interest, I highly recommend going to our website and then emailing them to nema.hazardmitigation@nebraska.gov. And one of the great people on my team will get back to you, and they'll put that NOI on file. They'll also do a review of it too. And if they notice any parts of it that need additional information, they'll reach back out to you and ask for you to provide that. We won't just leave you hanging in the dark saying, yep, we got your NOI. We'll work with you to make it the best NOI as possible, very well as in the application phase, we work with you hand in hand to get that best application so we can put that best foot forward. Other things that the hazard mitigation team can do is we're always looking for engagement opportunities. We love our work and we love what we do, but we also like to be out in the office or out of the office and meeting with communities and citizens who have mitigation actions. And we're more than happy to come sit down with you and go through your mitigation actions and figure out which ones would be very good, which ones fit with the programs that we have. So anything like that, we can come help you develop your notice of interest, as well as if you get to the application phase, we can come sit with you and work through your application. FEMA also has a mitigation for emergency managers. I know that title, it's a course, and I know that title seems a little specific, but really it's for anybody. We can come teach this course to you and your constituents and talk about mitigation. And this course is very similar to kind of what we talked about today. It goes through the funding opportunities, but it also takes a little bit deeper dive into what is mitigation and what does the mitigation process look like. And then you just request that course through your PET region here at NEMA, or you can just send us an email at NEMA Hazard Mitigation and we'll work with you to get that organized. Same with any engagement opportunities that you want. Feel free to just send us an email and we'll work as best as we can to get that scheduled for you. And then here is the whole NEMA hazard mitigation unit. There's just 4 of us, including our supervisor, but we work diligently every day and we're just trying to put as much mitigation funding back into the state as possible. So if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to come talk to anybody on that list or email our general mailbox as well.
Adele, we've had a question added to the chat. Gary asks if there's a list of communities in good standing.
I guess I'm not sure if we maintain a list for Department of Natural Resources, but if your community has been sanctioned by FEMA for poor administration of your NFIP program, your community will know it. And also the Department of Natural Resources does have access. Oh, great, Jeff, thank you for putting in the community status book. And also we have access to FEMA's current record system as well, individually. Okay, we've also got a remark from Jane Daly. She states that we have a drainage ditch that doesn't drain adequately. We may need to dredge, clean out, or reinstall new culverts. What is the best funding source? One note, and I'll let you answer some of this, Lexy, as well, but one note I'd like to make is that we get a lot of requests that relate to maintenance activities, and for the mitigation grants, they do not fund or support maintenance. Maintenance can include such as clearing out vegetation or debris that's accumulated within a community's stormwater system and is causing flooding. So do keep that in mind. With regards to the dredging or reinstalling new culverts, it may be that you can qualify for planning grant money to figure out what would be the appropriate design to alleviate the flooding that you're experiencing. And if your community is part of a mapping project with Department of Natural Resources, you can request something called real-time technical assistance. And through real-time technical assistance, our engineers can incorporate basic analysis such as whether the increasing their cross-section of a culvert will alleviate flooding in a certain area. Lexi, do you have anything to add on this question?
Yeah, so both of our brick and our HMGP projects can cover spreading or potentially installing new culverts. Like Adele said, the HMA programs don't do the maintenance, so they won't do the clean out, etc., things like that. But Adele touched on a really good point, is doing like a planning project or project scoping. Under brick, we one of the types of projects we can do is a project scoping, and that's where we look at the flooding issue. We assess the current like culverts, and then you can write into your plan to basically create a shovel-ready project for the next round of funding, where you'll have all the engineering designs, you'll have the benefit cost analysis completed, everything will be ready to go. You're just waiting on that final push for funding. I think probably the best funding source with this would be a brick project scoping.
Thank you. We've got this question from Dennis. Can DNR or NEMA assist in redesigning a park that is in the floodplain? From DNR, we can't do design, but we would be happy to meet with you for a one-on-one to brainstorm ideas or help you be aware of certain considerations that would need to be made from a floodplain management perspective, as well as the grant criteria perspective. So we don't do design work, but we're happy to do one-on-ones to help discuss options and approaches. This, Lexi pointed out the distinction between planning grants and like shovel ready or grants for development. And on something like this, you could apply for funding to support the planning or redesigning of a park, as well as applying for funds to actually implement the design that is developed as a result of the planning grant. Anything else to add, Lexi?
No, I don't have anything.
Right. Any other questions from folks? We've got 1 minute left. But I would like to say that we are happy to discuss your project ideas with you at any time. As Lexi said, we'll work closely with you to make that NOI and that grant application as robust as possible. And again, the grants that we're working within are those FEMA grants. There are a number of grants out there. And as a project concept develops, feel free to reach out to us to discuss different strategies for advancing your idea. We're available all the time. All right. Unless there's any other questions, I guess we'll let you go. Thank you everyone for joining us today. There is going to be another Department of Natural Resources training in 1 month on the 3rd Thursday. Look for that. I think the topic is permitting.